Alright, so this is the ACC tutorial for the new AUP Campus Lab system, and it's going to take you through the back end of the website. I've already created a separate video from the student perspective of how to submit a budget request, how that all works, so I'd encourage you to also take a look at that. But this video specifically is going to be how to set up the process settings and also how to review requests. So by the end of this video, you should understand how to create the different budgets, how to edit all the questions, how to review, push forward requests, and overall, hopefully you'll just gain an understanding of how this new process works. So to get started, you're going to go to this URL, which is aup.campuslabs.com/budgeting. And if you're not already logged into Campus Labs, it's going to prompt you to log in, where you'll just use your normal AUP information that you use for any other portal. And then if you've done this /budgeting part correctly, it should take you to a page that looks like this. If you see my budget request, and you only see my budget request, that means that you don't have the admin properties that you should have, and you should speak to Safia, Kevin, Jonathan, something like that, in order to gain that proper access. So first I'm going to go over the process settings, because this is really important to understanding how the website actually works and the nuances that we've added for AUP purposes. So you're going to click on this gear here, and it's process settings. And so the system emails is all about when a student submits a budget request, it's the details to that email that they will receive after submitting the request. But what I want to focus on here is request processes. So once you made it to the request processes section, you're going to see all 4 different pre-existing SGA budgets show up. And this is because we've already logged to them and currently they're active. So in this system, you have active budgets and inactive budgets. Inactive budgets are going to be archives of budgets from past semesters. After the end of the year, we'll deactivate all the budgets and then they will move into this section, so we're never losing any information that we can use for future semesters. But it's really important that when you create a budget or you edit a budget, that you make sure that you've activated it and you have the correct dates so that it will appear to the student body. So if you want to create a new budget, you will hit create process, but for right now we've already done that, so I'm going to take you through the individual budgets, how it works, how to set it up, the important parts, and hopefully it should be a bit clearer as to how to change things, how to make edits. And again, this is a new process, so it's going to take a bit of time to really adapt to it, and so a lot of changes will be made, so it's important that you understand the nuances and how to make the edits that you need in order to better this system for AUP. So you can see the name, the description, the process availability, and this is really important because this is going to determine whether or not your budget is active, meaning that it's available to the student body, or inactive, so it will be archived for history purposes. And then another important thing to take a look at is the dates. So this is when it's going to be available for submissions, and if you don't have the correct dates, the budget will appear as inactive. So we can either decide if it's best to set these dates by semester or if it's best to set these dates by a full year. But currently they're just set for the example, so we can play around with the system, get used to it, but these things can always be changed. Now this part is important because it's something that can't be changed. And when you set up a budget, it's imperative that you get this right or you're going to have to do it all over again. So here are there are 3 parts to it. The first one is deciding who the budget is for. So do we want to allow individuals and organizations, for example, clubs, to access the budget, just individuals, or just organizations? And unless it's the club's budget, which should be restricted just to organizations, I'd recommend that all the other budgets go to individuals and organizations just in case, because you can argue that the club's budget comes only from clubs, but at the same time there have been instances in the past where clubs have requested money from activities and social, so it's best to just have that option. So the second part of this that you really have to get right is about additional information. And for this one, it's about whether or not you want to include custom questions, which means do you want to be able to basically replace the old AUP web form? And I would recommend that this is always selected just in case you decide that you do want to be able to ask your users questions, because again, you can't change it. And the third and final thing that you have to get correct is the request amount. So do you want a single amount or a multi-line budget? My advice would just be to make the multi-line budget, because that's going to be the most options, and even if this doesn't make sense to you right now, hopefully as we go through this video it's going to make more sense. But The only budgets that you could possibly think of being a single amount would probably be the exec budgets or perhaps the senator's budget, but just to be safe, I'd recommend that you always choose a multi-line budget. All right, so once you hit next, you're going to come across this customs questions section, and this I've made different for each budget, but basically what I did for activities and social and clubs is I just copied all of the information from the old web form and placed it here. So take a look at it. If you find that there's anything irrelevant, you can delete it. If you want to add questions, you can all decide to add them. But if you want to add them, you hit new. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you're familiar with SurveyMonkey or any of the other services like that, the system works pretty much the same. So just play around with that, see if there's any information you need, and then that's the custom questions section. So once you're done with the custom questions, it's going to bring you to this budget templates page. And this part is critical because this is all about how students are going to break down their budget requests very specifically. So I've already taken the time to try and create these different categories, which I've found are trends when people are requesting budgets. For example, refreshments, travel, materials, venue rentals, there's an other category, things like that. So take a look through it and see if there's anything that makes sense to be added. And if you want to add something, you want to go to the main category and then you just hit add line item. So for example, if we're just adding to refreshments, we could add something like, let's say drink's not there. So you add drink, you can add a description if you want. Most of these are typically going to be expenses because the students are asking for money, they're not putting it back in. And then maximum and minimum amounts, you can add them if you want, but honestly, I really don't think it's necessary because if you want to make an exception, you're going to have to go back and change it. So just don't worry about that, and then you'd hit save and it would appear. But we're not going to do that because drink's already there. So I've shown you how to edit it, but it probably doesn't make sense as to exactly what it is. So my advice, go to the student perspective video, take a look at it, and it should make a lot more sense to you. Right, so then you're going to hit next. So once you're done with the budget templates, it will take you to the workflow. And this should look pretty familiar to you if you're familiar with the ACC process and how a budget moves. So you have your ACC initial review, which is basically when a student initially submits a request, you can deny it, return it. You probably shouldn't be denying it. Hopefully you'll return it if it needs any work. Or most likely you'll move it to the next step. And so this is going to be the point where you send them an email, setting up a meeting. But this step is just to say we've received your review and we will push it on to the next step, or we're going to send it back to you so you can make some revisions before we move to that meeting review. And then so you have your meeting review, which is after you've met with them, you can make some edits, change the budget. And so hopefully at one point everybody in ACC should have the admin privileges to move these two steps forward. Then you have your SJ Senate review, then the Dean review, and then we're not sure if accounting is going to be able to work on this platform, but we're hoping eventually to be able to get them on board. So currently we have the 5 steps. And so if you want to edit a budget, you can just come up here and click the hyperlink. And here you'll see the step name. You can just delete the step altogether if you guys decide to change the way things work. You can add reviewers, so this is who is going to have access into what section. Obviously this will change as everybody gets more acquainted with the system. So here are the actions available to the request reviewer. And this is important because you'll notice that we didn't give anyone the privilege to approve a request besides Kevin or Mark. So this is something that you want to make sure is unclicked when you're editing a budget because we don't want anyone accidentally approving the budget right away. So you can deny it, you can return it for revision, which will most likely happen, or you can move it forward. And again, these are all the people who have access. These are all the things about what they can do. And for all these, we have enabled adjustments. So this is if someone sends something in, you can say, oh no, let's add 100 euros, or I think that we need to add a cushion or something like that. So that's the workflow, and that's basically the final step as far as editing the back end of the website is concerned. And now that you understand how to edit the background, I'm going to take you through what happens once a student submits a request. So you're going to go back home. So when a request is submitted from a student, if you have the proper admin privileges under the ACC, you will receive an email saying that a request has been submitted, and then you can go to the campuslabs.com/budgeting homepage and hit request to review. And so I've created some fake requests just so you can see what it would look like, but these are going to be all the ones that have not yet been reviewed. So let's take a look at the speaking event that I submitted. And so this is what the page will look like once a request is submitted. So you have the general details of the event, and it's important to note that the request ID is not the student ID number, but you can see the name of the student here. And then there's a description, which should be a bit longer than this, and you will see the request total, which for this example was $317. And also a quick note, everything in Campus Labs as of right now is coming up in dollars. Hopefully we'll be able to get to a point where we can change it to euros. But for right now, unfortunately, we're just going to have to stick with dollars and pretend that it's in euros. So once you see the general information, you can see all of the responses to the questions that are posed in that custom questions section. And then you can also see the complete breakdown of the budget that they've requested. So once you reviewed the budget, if everything looks good, you have a couple options. So first, you can just forward it to the next step. And after you do that, you're going to want to send an email to the person that submitted it. You can do that using their AUP ID number, which will be here to get their email, or you can search their name, which is located here. And then you want to send them that email where you can arrange the ACC meeting and they can go over the budget with you. If things aren't looking good, you can return it for a follow-up, so you can add a comment and say, hey, I want you to take a look at this budget, you're requesting too much money, or hey, let's add a cushion. But this is also something that you can do in the meeting, so it's not imperative to have the budget correct before they come to the meeting. Back to previous step is not really worth clicking. Honestly, we should take that away because the best option is going to be return for follow-up. And if the request is completely ridiculous, you should deny it. But ultimately, there should be very few requests that are denied right off the bat. So these are all the options you'll have as far as the next step is concerned. It's important to remember that you need to send that email still once you've forwarded it to the next step. And then you can also add comments here if there's anything that you want to specify or note or just have in the history of this request. So as far as approving budget requests is concerned, the ACC can really only approve the first two, which is the initial review. Then you send the email, then you have the meeting, and then you can approve it again. And you can also add comments or put amendments during that process. And then the Senate review will be approved by Jonathan or whoever is in charge of the ACC at that time, and then it goes on from there. So basically your job is just to get the review through those first two steps. Also, a really quick thing I also wanted to note about this system is if you go back to the home page and then you hit request to review, this export right here will export an Excel file of the entire master budget. So you can see all of the information, which is really nice and a very easy way to keep things organized. So if you're ever trying to get a hold of that master budget, it will all come up in this export setting. But other than that, that's pretty much all that I have for you today for learning the Campus Labs budgeting system. If you have any questions, you can email me at francesca.coyne@aup.edu, or you can always ask Jonathan, Kevin, or Safia, and there are also a couple other tutorial videos for Campus Labs that you can take a look at. So hopefully this helped, and best of luck. Thanks.